So, hello everybody. As Peter says, I'm going to talk about Teams and why, if you're running a tenant with Teams in it, you should care about sensitivity labels. Of course, you don't have to care at all about sensitivity labels, but I think that there's good value here for you if you use them. Anyway, so let's get this going. Let's see. Okay. So this is me without the hair I currently have right now due to the pandemic, but that's another thing. So I've been around for quite a while. I write about Office 365 and Microsoft 365. I've been writing about it for years and years. Used to write a lot about Exchange before that, but of course, like everybody else, once you come into the world of Office 365, you have to expand your wings. So I cover pretty well everything right now. We have this ebook which is out called the Office 365 for IT Pros book. We update that monthly to keep in touch with what's happening inside the ecosystem. And it's available for all you guys if you want at a discount. I thought we'd throw that in just to give you something. There's lots of stuff about sensitivity labels, for example, in the book. Anyway, end of the marketing. So what I want to talk about today is, firstly, we'll just talk about what sensitivity labels actually do, why they exist, why has Microsoft got them around, who can use them, that kind of stuff. Then I'll talk a little bit about container management, which is the really good thing that sensitivity labels can do for Teams. And then I talk about the programmatic approach, how you can use PowerShell and the graph to manipulate sensitivity labels, because not everything can be done out of the box. You can't do everything that you might want to with the tools Microsoft provides. So it's nice to have that programmatic approach to help you. And this will be quite a quick, session. We've only got 40 minutes or whatever. Ask lots of questions, put them in the list, the conversation, and the group chat, and we'll get there. Okay, so sensitivity labels. First, they're based on a platform called Microsoft Information Protection, which used to be called Azure Information Protection. You still see Azure Information Protection around. That's mostly dealing with the services that are consumed by MIP. But anyway, Microsoft Information Protection is all about protecting content, be it content at rest, content that is in flight, such as an email that's being sent, content that's processed at scale, whatever, just protecting content. And what sensitivity labels do is they allow you to do basically three things. Firstly, they allow you to put visual markings on items. Visual marking for a document could be a watermark, it could be a header and a footer. For Outlook messages, they're going to be things like footers and headers, not going to be watermarks. And a visual marking is there to remind a user that this information is of a particular type. It's confidential, or it should not be shared externally, or indeed it's available for public release. That's what a visual marking is. And you do hope that your users will look at the visual marking and they will know how to deal with content. And the second thing is this thing called rights management based encryption. Now, rights management has a long history inside Microsoft. It goes back to the rights management server, which was on premises, which was originally introduced when Steve Ballmer got very annoyed that some confidential information that was shared among the Microsoft Executive Committee was leaked to a journalist. And he demanded an engineering solution which would allow any information sent by him or his direct reports, or indeed anybody within Microsoft, to be restricted. And what rights management does is it says, okay, you've got a role, you're the author. Therefore, as the author, your role allows you to have a bunch of permissions, or you're a reader and you have different permissions, or indeed you're somebody who's a contributor, you have even more permissions than a reader. So that's what rights management means. A part of what rights management do is apply encryption. And they can apply encryption to Exchange Online, to SharePoint Online, OneDrive, for business, for files stored there. And if you use an add-on program called the Unified Labeling Client, you can apply it to files stored outside Office 365. Things like, graphics files stored outside Office 365. But the point is, like, if you've got Office 365 licenses, you can use rights management based encryption for Exchange, SharePoint, or OneDrive for Business. Anything stored in there, you can apply these sensitivity labels to them. The permissions that rights management can give to somebody to actually consume content can be predefined, so they're set by an author when the label is set up. They can be user-defined, so I created an item, I apply a label to it, and then I define what permissions the recipient is going to get. And they can also be double key, which means that Microsoft stores one key and the organization, the tenant, stores another, and that's used to make sure that you have total control over encrypted information. So visual marking and rights management have been around for quite a while. What came into play last year was container management. And container management is what we're really interested about when we come to talk about Teams. Because container management is all about policy-based application of settings for Microsoft 365 groups and their associated Teams and SharePoint online sites. So a container is a group. It's also the team and the SharePoint site associated with the group. Once you apply policy-based management to the group, the team and the SharePoint online sites also receive the same settings. And indeed, if you apply a policy-based label to a team, the SharePoint site and its underlying group will get it. So it's all an interconnected system, if you will. You can't have a group with one set of settings and Teams has another and SharePoint has another. They all share the same set of management settings. And this replaces the older text-based classifications, which did absolutely nothing for these containers. You could put a text-based classification called highly confidential or top secret or never share this information anywhere on a team or a SharePoint site, and didn't mean anything to the users except that it was a visual marker to say, hey, maybe we should do something special to protect the information in this site. But the classifications by themselves did nothing. Labels have the same ability to project that visual marking, but they also bring this policy-based management with them. So when you apply a label, a sensitivity label with these container settings to a group, to its team, or to a SharePoint site, those containers inherit the policy setting from the label, right? And today, there's a limited set. It's a very useful set, but it is a limited set. There's a limited set of policy settings which are inherited from the label. In the future, there's going to be a lot more. But today, even today, once you apply a label to a team, to a site, or to its group, the privacy of the site, so it's either private or public, guest access is allowed or not, and the SharePoint site sharing capability, can I share it with external people, yes or no, that kind of thing, and indeed whether access is permitted from unmanaged devices. These four settings are inherited from the site. And as I say, there is going to be more coming in things to deal with things like conditional access policies and so forth and so on. But I think that the important takeaway point here is that once you apply a label to one of these containers, you automatically get some policy settings applied to that container. And that's a great thing when you think about it from a management perspective, from a tenant management perspective. Because one of the things we're seeing is an explosion in the number of groups and teams and sites. And it is really difficult if you don't have some level of automation to make sure that the right settings are applied to all of those containers. And this is a solution. Imperfect perhaps at the moment, but very powerful in the same at the same time. Very important thing though is that clearly these containers are lots of content. You know, a team has got lots of channels, it's got a lot of messages and so forth and so on. SharePoint site obviously has got folders and lists and documents, and a Microsoft 365 group is a mailbox. Could have a plan. You know, lots of content. Applying a sensitivity label to a container has zero effect on the contents of that container. Zero effect. So if you take, for example, a label that implies encryption to a document, which also has container management settings, and we'll come to talk about label scope in a moment. But if you apply that label with encryption to a container, the label is applied to the container. The containers inherit the settings from the label, but encryption does not happen to the documents, to the messages, to anything else within that container. That's a common misconception that I want to kill stone dead here. Nothing happens to the content of those containers. They remain unaffected and untouched. So, talked a little bit about scope. Scope for a sensitivity label defines how it can be used. So when you're setting up a label, you set the scope. And you can set it to say, well, I want this label to deal with groups and sites. And that is, in fact, you're saying, I want it to be a container management label. Or you could say, I want it to be able to use with files and email. That means you want it to be able to use it for visual marking and encryption. Right? Or you can say, I want to use the same label for both. So you can end up with a set of labels which have both container management and encryption and visual marking settings. I think this is terribly, terribly confusing. So my strong recommendation to anybody who is setting out along the road to sensitivity labels, that if you are just starting off, think about how you're going to use these labels. And I believe that at the end of the day, you'll conclude that it is easier to manage to have one set of labels which are used only and exclusively for container management, and another set of labels which are used only and exclusively for content management. Content management means that those labels can be applied to documents and messages and so forth and so on. The applications are intelligent enough, if you will, that they will filter out labels that a user cannot apply. So let's take Word for Windows. If Word starts up, it loads the sets of sensitivity labels that are available to the user. If it finds a label that the scope of the label is only for container management, it will not show that label to the user because the user can't use it. It doesn't have any content management settings. In the same way, if you go to Teams and you say, I want to label a team, Teams only shows you the labels that are available for container management. One reason why I think it's wise to have separate labels for container management and content management is that you can then use appropriate names for the labels. And naming is really important because the naming helps users understand how you intend a label to be used. So for content management, I think you're probably going to find that 3 or 4 labels maybe is all you need right now. On my side, I have limited access, I have guest access, I have general access, and confidential access. That's probably enough. In fact, Microsoft has a very similar scheme. But for content management, I think you probably have a much broader set because you probably have things like, partner available content, no encryption, public availability, and so forth, and so on. And the names are very different. The names that you give to a label that's intended for container management tends to be much more descriptive about it because you're trying to almost coach the user into picking the appropriate label. So something like partner content means something to an end user. Something like highly sensitive means something to an end user. Whereas for the container management labels, I think they're much more precise. General access, anybody can get to it. Guest access, this container has guests. Confidential access, nobody's really going to get into this, and so forth. So anyway, I'll throw out that idea to you. Now, something that comes up at this time always is that people say, hey, I've already got all these containers. I've already got all these labels set up. What am I going to do? Well, the easy way to approach that, I think, is to use a little bit of PowerShell, which will take a set of existing labels and replace them with more appropriate container labels. And in fact, I've written an article about how to do this. I think it's on practical365.com. But you can go and search for that. So you can go and replace the container labels with more appropriate labels if you want. So some goodness and badness about container management. The goodness, obviously, is that once an organization, once an administrator assigns settings to labels, the containers which have those labels inherit those settings. So you achieve a great level of consistency across the organization. All teams with the general access label behave in the same way. If the privacy is set to be private, all of those teams will be private. If guest access is allowed, all of those teams will allow guests. And when you think about this is a really nice thing when you've got hundreds or thousands of teams to deal with, because you do get that consistency through very little effort on your part. All you've got to do is set up the label, define the settings for the label, and there you go. Once the label is out there and team owners start to apply those labels, you get consistency, and that's a great thing. The bad thing, and this is a real gap that I think Microsoft needs to close, is that container owners, a site owner, a team owner, a group owner can't go and change the label. You may have a label on a team. You may even have set it programmatically to say, okay, this team of this type should have general access. And then the team owner says, oh, no, I don't like that. I'll set it to private access, or I'll set it to public access, or whatever. And of course, once you set the label, you get different settings inherited from the label, and the team starts to behave in a different way. So you lose the consistency that you wanted. There's no way to lock a label, and that's the kind of thing that people would like to do. I have set this team to be highly confidential. I do not want that label to be changed. I do not want any chance that a guest can join this team. But then the team owner says, no, I disagree with that. So I'll make that general access and open it up to guests. This is an audited event. It's a thing that's going to be captured in the Office 365 audit log. But so you can check when it happens. But of course, that means then you have to keep on going back to the audit log to go and see, is there any chance that somebody has changed the label in the last week or so? And then take appropriate actions. It would be so much better if you could say, once I apply a label to a container, it is locked, and only a global administrator or a Teams administrator or a SharePoint administrator can go and change that. In other words, that the container owner can't do it. It's just not enough. I think that would be a good thing to have. And Microsoft would be mad about this, but they've got a lot on their plate and they haven't done it. So I wrote up an article about how to monitor the Office 365 audit log and take action to restore a label on a container if you find that a label has been changed. And you can go and get it there on practical365.com and monitor changes for sensitivity labels through container management. And of course, it's written in PowerShell, so you can change it whatever way you want. All ideas are accepted and respected, as they say. Now, container management can generate this kind of thing called document mismatches. So let's talk a little bit about that. Sensitivity labels are arranged in a priority order. Once you create a sensitivity label, it gets a priority order within its set. So the priority goes from 0, which is the lowest. That would be something like, there's no encryption on this. Basically, anybody can use it, and it goes up in an increasing level of sensitivity. So the last label in the set is the most sensitive label, ultra confidential, top secret, whatever. When you assign a label to a container, it sets a label for the stored file. So let's say you have a label called general access, and the general access label is priority number 6 in the set, right? The general access has 6 to the set. If I now come along, sorry, back page. I now come along and I upload a document to the SharePoint site for the group, for the team, and the document has a different label, has a higher priority label. Let's say it has a label called super sensitive, and the priority order for super sensitive is 8. If I upload that document, super sensitive, to the SharePoint site, we have a document mismatch, because I now have a document which is more sensitive. Remember, it's 8. It's got sensitivity label priority 8 in a site with sensitivity label priority 6. And that's a mismatch. And the reason why it's a mismatch is that SharePoint believes that you should only store documents in a labeled site which are at the same level or lower. So, and the reason why this is so is, when you think about it, is that if I've got a general access site where pretty well any type of document can be stored, and all of a sudden somebody uploads a really sensitive document to that site, that's a problem when you think about it. Why should a super sensitive document be in a general purpose site? That doesn't seem to be logical. So when this happens, the user and the site owners are notified that they have potentially stored a document in the wrong place. And this is the information that they send. You get this email from SharePoint to say, you know what, hey, a file that you recently uploaded or changed has sensitivity label, it's a higher priority than the level of the site. So, you know, this is a thing to think about. And the reason why I say it's a thing to think about is that when you are charting out the set of labels that you want to create for container management, you want to think about the type of documents that are likely to be stored in the sites with those labels. So again, if I have a document, let's say I have a container label called general access, and I know that there are document labels called public, anybody can access, no encryption. Let's say there's 3 labels, and they are label priority order 0, 1, and 2. Then general access, the container, it should be a priority number 4 in the container management list, to make sure that no document mismatches can occur when those other labels, when documents labeled with those other labels are stored in it. It's just a thing to think about, because, and the reason why is that, of course, you don't want to have a whole pile of users getting document mismatch messages like the one that you see on the screen, because that is going to cause a lot of work for the help desk to try and coach users about why this is happening. If you think about the kind of documents that are likely to be stored in the site, the labels they have, and make sure that then those labels have a lower priority than the label given to the site, you won't see these messages, and that's a good thing. So, some programmatic access. There are PowerShell commandlets to deal with the labels themselves. They're in the compliance part of the Exchange Online Management module, so you have to go and connect to the compliance endpoint to see these labels. You do that using the connect IPPS session commandlet, and that connects a separate session to the compliance endpoint. And then you can use new label, set label, and get label. These set label, for example, would allow you to manipulate the container management settings for a label. Once you've got your set of labels set up, you can set them on containers using set unified group and set SPO site. There's no Teams commandlet to set a label. So, but if you set it using set unified group on the group, that label assignment will synchronize down to the team, and all will be well. You can also decrypt encrypted SharePoint documents with unlock SPO sensitivity label encrypted file. And you may wonder, why would you want to do this? And by the way, only SharePoint administrators and global administrators can do this. But you might be wondering why you would ever want to do this. Well, when you think about it, sometimes you need to export a lot of SharePoint documents. And if those documents are encrypted and they're put into a place where somebody can access them but doesn't have the right to open the documents, they won't be able to see the content. One specific example is tenant-to-tenant migration. When you've got a tenant-to-tenant migration, you're moving content from one tenant to another. And when the content gets to the target tenant, the people who sign into that tenant may not have the rights to access the files. So what's typically done in tenant-to-tenant migration is that you need to decrypt all content that's going to be moved. Remember that a sensitivity label is unique to a tenant, and the rights assigned by that sensitivity label are unique to that tenant. So we need to remove the sensitivity label from the documents moving and then get them over to the target tenant, and then they can be relabeled there. It's just a thing to think about. You can use the Microsoft Graph as well to do things with labels, including to decrypt documents, and that's what you would do if you wanted to do this at scale. I mean, just doing it in pure PowerPoint with PowerShell would probably take a long time. So you'd use the power of the graph to find the information and then call this commandlet to decrypt things. One thing that I'll point out to about programmatic access is that there's no way in PowerShell right now to actually set a sensitivity label on a document. Not even in the PMP module. Microsoft hasn't provided that. So when ISVs build integrations to use sensitivity labels, they have to use the MIP SDK to do this. We've asked Microsoft, a lot of people have asked Microsoft for a PowerShell command to do it, because it would be quite handy at times to be able to apply a sensitivity label to a set of documents or a set of messages, and they haven't done that yet. So anyway, hopefully that will come, and we'll get that soon. So what have I done? So here we are. This is in summary why I think sensitivity labels are valuable to teams. They give you that consistency of settings to control guest access and indeed privacy for teams and sites across the tenant. That's one thing. They give you consistent settings for the external sharing capability for the SharePoint sites connected to teams as well. And possibly more important from a strategic level, they lay this foundation that you can benefit as Microsoft adds more management settings to labels. And what I mean by this is that if you've already got all your teams labeled with sensitivity labels, then as Microsoft adds extra settings to those labels, you'll be able to take advantage of those management settings. You don't have to use them. And indeed, there are some that are going to come along that you probably say, no, I'm not going to use that, perhaps because you don't use Azure AD conditional access policies, for instance. But you have the option to do it once you set up the infrastructure so that you have sensitivity labels and you have applied those sensitivity labels to groups, teams, and sites. So it's all about planning for the future. And I think, you know, if I was a small tenant, would I bother with sensitivity labels? Probably not, because if I'm only managing 50 or 100 teams, yeah, I could do that easily enough. A little bit of PowerShell and a lot of manual intervention would probably do the same thing. But on the other hand, once as we've seen, there's this absolute explosion of teams everywhere. So with the number of teams that are actually in use today, I think this is a really good way of getting that consistency in access control and privacy and sharing across an entire tenant. Okay, that's all I had to say about this topic. I guess we can take any questions. Okay, let's go through these questions. I guess I can do that, Peter, yeah?
Yeah, go for it, Tony. We've got one question from Rue.
He's not allowed to ask questions. He should be writing about this topic.
He should be, yeah.
Do I know if there's anything in the product roadmap to container labels to auto-apply these labels to files? Yeah. So this is the kind of thing of today you have, in SharePoint particularly, you have a default label for a folder in a SharePoint site, a default retention label. You don't have a default sensitivity label. That's been asked for a lot. And I believe it will come, but I can't tell you when. I don't work for Microsoft. I have zero control over what they do. But and of course, since the pandemic's been on, I haven't been able to go to Microsoft and over to Redmond and take people out to restaurants and pour bottles of red wine into them to find out what's really going on. So I couldn't possibly say what they could and couldn't do. So it would be good to auto protect files based on document library with only the AIP A1 licenses. Yes, I agree. Yeah, they do need to get rid of the old IRM system big time. And I think they understand that. The old IRM system is where protection is applied to documents when they're downloaded from a SharePoint site. But the great thing about sensitivity labels is that once they are applied to content, they stay with that content for the lifetime of the content. It's not just when downloaded, they're actually, it's actually when for the entire lifetime. Actually, a little secret about this is that when you upload an encrypted document to SharePoint, SharePoint strips off the encryption. So the content that's stored in Azure SQL is unencrypted. And there's a very good reason for this, and that is that if the document remained encrypted, then indexing couldn't find all the information that's in the document, couldn't index that. So things like document DLP policies wouldn't work, content search wouldn't work, e-discovery wouldn't work, and so forth and so on. So what Microsoft decided, they had this problem for years and years. What they decided when they introduced SharePoint, full SharePoint support for sensitivity labels, that was when they uploaded documents into SharePoint, they would strip off the encryption and they would reapply encryption anytime somebody wanted to use the document. So the document inside SharePoint is actually not encrypted. So that's the way it works. And it works well, I could say. So do sensitivity labels interact in any way with retention labels and policy? Great question. You know what? If you went to an Ignite session in 2016 or 2017, you may have gone to sessions about unified labels where Microsoft spoke with and made huge promises for a label that would do everything. It would do retention and it would do encryption and it would possibly even make your porridge in the morning for your breakfast. But they found out that I think they had two big issues. One issue was that technical issues. Just constructing a single label to do everything is difficult. It's also difficult to document. It's difficult to support. It's difficult for people to get their heads around. It's much easier when you've got a label that's stored that does a single thing like retention or sensitivity control. So that was one thing. The second thing is introducing problems about positioning and licensing and whatever. And Microsoft loves being able to license particular features because then they can sell that particular feature to people. So if you had one Uber license, one Uber label that could do everything, it's kind of hard to break that down and license individual bits of it. So they went, I think it was mostly the technical issues that stopped the whole grand vision of unified licensing, labeling going away. So you can't do it now. They have no connection whatsoever. There's no connection whatsoever between sensitivity labels and retention labels. Sorry. Let's see. Could sensitivity labels also use as metadata without to mark test it? Or should we use? You can have a sensitivity label without encryption, and a sensitivity label without encryption can be used for container management. So if you want to set up a sensitivity label called test site with no encryption, no nothing. Just use that and apply that sensitivity label to those test sites, and there you are. It works, no problem. Okay, any other questions? No other questions. Come on, guys. Give us a question. Jeez. You want to ask,
Yeah.
ask me questions about anything else? When I'm getting a haircut?
Hey. So what I'm going to put in the chat, actually, for anyone who wants to take a look, is the link to the M365 Roadmap for what's coming in sensitivity labeling. It's always worth keeping an eye on what's coming there. So that's good. One other thing about sensitivity labels, of course, Tony, is you mentioned there quite rightly that they don't have to encrypt. They can just be a label. But
they can also remove decryption.
Exactly.
Is that what you were going to say? Yeah.
It was indeed. It was indeed. And of course, we've got
true.
the content marking as well. Content marking is the other.
Yeah, that's the visual. That's the visual marking.
The visual marking. So lots of good applications for them. And I think you're right. I think you're entirely right, Tony. I think this one is going to run and run. I think it's going to develop. And
well, let me give you two caveats here. Mm-hmm. While I have the time, because nobody's asking any questions, let me give you two caveats about sensitivity labels. The first thing is really just a remark, and that is that you're going to see more and more sensitivity label functionality being included in native applications. That you're already seeing it today in the Office apps. And the reason being there is that it makes it a lot easier for Microsoft to ship improvements, right? But the downside of this is that as the volume of encrypted content grows inside Office 365 tenants or Microsoft 365 tenants, whichever you call them, it means that ISVs and indeed organization-specific programmatic access has got to be able to deal with an increasing volume of encrypted content. I mentioned earlier the issue about tenant-to-tenant migration, where you've got a whole batch of SharePoint documents that need to be extracted, decrypted, and then moved. Well, think about it. Today, maybe only 0.5%, and I just made that number up for illustrative for this argument, if you like, or this discussion. But let's say the 0.5% of all Office 365 content is encrypted. What's it going to be like in a couple of years' time if 10% is encrypted? It means that every piece of ISV technology, every piece of homegrown technology that you may have created using the Graph or PowerShell, that has got to be able to deal with encrypted content. And sometimes I don't feel that ISVs in particular have figured this out yet. One example of this is backup. Okay, let's say that you back up a whole SharePoint library and it is full of encrypted content, and that's fine. But then you come to restore it sometime later, and the label is gone. The label's gone. Or the user who applied the labels to documents was the only person who had control over that label. You've now got a whole batch of encrypted files that can't be decrypted, except by an administrator using that unlock thing, right? So the point is that I think there are these like hidden corners that we still haven't found all of the answers to. We don't know how we're going to be able to deal with this volume of encrypted data over the years. And Microsoft is pumping out more and more ways of allowing you to apply encryption, such as, for example, you've now got the ability to go and apply sensitivity labels to data at rest using things like trainable classifiers to find specific types of documents, like, let's say, customer orders or invoices or whatever, and apply specific sensitivity labels to them. So this is just going to mean that over time we're going to get more and more encrypted content, and we just got to be able to deal with it. So that's the downside of using this technology. The upside, I think, is great, but you've always got to keep an eye on the challenges that exist as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned tenant migrations as well, which are becoming more and more commonplace and will only continue to do so, I would say, with mergers, divestitures, and even just incorrect tenant names when people want to changed purely because of that.
Yeah, the thing about tenant migration is interesting because of the influence of Teams. The lack of Teams APIs and the volume of Teams and the amount and the influence Teams has had on SharePoint. You know, I mean, the fact is that people don't know they're using SharePoint now. They just see files are being stored. They don't use they don't really realize the OneDrive has been used, but OneDrive is accumulating a huge amount of Teams meeting recordings, for instance, and a whole pile of shared files. And you get all this type of stuff coming in, and you know, tenant migration now without those APIs suddenly becomes a real big challenge. Anyway, can labels be added to communication site? No, it's all based on Microsoft 365 group. The group is the basic container. I mean, Microsoft talk about container management. What they're really saying is it's the Microsoft 365 group management, because anything associated with the group that supports sensitivity labels will pick up the label settings. Planner is one example of a group connected resource that doesn't support sensitivity labels and settings today. Yammer with modern networks is another. Can I share my thoughts about direction of sensitivity on container level for additional features? Well, it'd be nice, firstly, that we get this, we get Planner to support sensitivity labels. That hasn't happened yet. And I suspect that there are some things in flight that are going to make Planner a little bit more complex very soon. I mean, you saw the announcement of groupless based plans. They call them roster plans. So they don't have groups. So how would sensitivity labels work there? In fact, those roster-based groups have their own membership, so we don't actually know what's going to happen there. Good API. Yes, Tom Morgan, who of course would call for really good API and PowerShell support. Do I think Microsoft will ever provide an API support for ISVs to decrypt? Yeah, it's called calling that unlock commandlet, which is what you can do from the graph. Similar to for ISV solutions around indexing, working with I don't know. You know, they have so much work to do for just the basic stuff about managing encryption and sensitivity labels, especially in SharePoint. They've got to get that done before they really take care of the ISVs. I suspect that the ISVs would have to come up with particular use cases and justify them to Microsoft to get them to move up. I think you just partially answered. What did I just partially answer? I don't partially answer anything. I just ramble on incoherently about stuff. Can I share thoughts on the container? Additional features often. Oh, tab within tabs. Well, it's on the container level. So a tab is just inside the container. So, you know, it has no effect. It has an effect on the management settings on the container. That's all they're going to do. It's management settings. So they're not going to do anything to do with tabs or anything like that. Is that a better answer? They do it. P4TW type groupless plans. P4TW, that's a new one. What's that mean?
Yeah, I'm wondering the same, actually.
P4TW.
Project for the web.
Project. Oh.
That is a new one.
That's a good one. Thank you very much. Yeah. Well, of course, project doesn't depend on Microsoft 365 groups, and groups are needed to do sensitivity labels, container management. So not there yet. I mean, Microsoft have got to get basic support for these container management labels into Planner, into Yammer. That's probably the next step. After that, they've got to build out the set of management settings, which they're already they're doing. They've already got some stuff in preview. So it's happening. This is a very interesting area, I'd say, to keep an eye on. You'll see a lot of change over the next year or so.
Yeah, definitely more to come. I agree, and keep an eye on that roadmap. But any more questions for Tony? Oh, we've got another one.
Oh,
it's a by the way.
it's a by the way. Now, sure, I'm going to spend more money on other topics. Yeah, big fan of the backup debate. Yeah, but funnily, backup ISVs don't like me very much. I've never worked out that why. Maybe I have a particular perspective that they don't appreciate.
Yeah, for anyone who doesn't know what Tony's talking about, you can look on YouTube a lively debate that you had with a gentleman at Half Point, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I can't remember his name, but
John something. I can't remember. It's a long time ago.
It was a while ago.
The point is that things haven't changed very much, and we're still dealing with the lack of APIs, which doesn't really helpful.
Yeah. The backup question is one it's a Marmite one. I mean, I'm very much where you are with it, Tony. I think in similar ways, but there are mainly people who sell these products, as you would say, who.
Well, I keep on saying to people, I am not against backup. I'm not against backup. Backup has its place. The important thing that I keep on saying is that people need to understand the technology that they have already bought and paid for and are paying for on a monthly basis. If you understand the capabilities of the software you bought and paid for and use those capabilities to the fullest degree, you will cover some of the use cases that backup vendors use to create this demand for their software. I have no doubt that backup software can deal quite efficiently with Exchange and SharePoint content. Their problems are all with the cloud-only software like Teams, and Planner, and Yammer, and anything that's connected together. And when it's just the level of interconnectivity that Microsoft has built into these products. So when you think about it, it must be an incredibly difficult task to think about, okay, how am I going to back up the entire Teams ecosystem and then do it in such a way that I can reassemble it accurately when required? That's stunning. That's stunningly difficult when you think about it.
Yeah, where do you even begin to tackle that? Absolutely. Anyhow, conscious of the time, Tony, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed your company. It's been a great session, and we shall catch you down the road. Appreciate your time, and thank you all for attending.
Yep. Cheers, so. Bye-bye.
Bye for now. Thank you.